Hello, I'm Barbara Taylor. I'm principal investigator on the Pathologies of Solitude project funded by the Wellcome Trust and based at Queen Mary University of London. And I'm very, very delighted to, I was going to say have with me, but that's not quite, but to be in conversation with, in these strange times of ours, two extremely distinguished historians, Tom LaCur and Thomas Dixon, in this discussion of people, animals, and empathy. So I'm just briefly introduce. So Tom LaCur is a cultural historian at Berkeley, whose many well-known books and articles explore fundamentals of human experience, religion, sex, gendering, solitude, death. His most recent book, The Work of the Dead, A Cultural History of Mortal Remains, which is published in 2015, has been awarded 6 major prizes. Tom is currently researching the history of humanitarianism and dogs in Western art, and I suppose dog-human relationships more generally. Thomas Dixon is a leading historian of the emotions based here at Queen Mary. He currently runs a Wellcome Trust project entitled Living with Feeling, Emotional Health in History, Philosophy, and Experience. The outputs of this project include an award-winning podcast, The Sound of Anger, and a series of lessons for primary schools called Developing Emotions. Thomas's books include From Passions to Emotions, published in 2003, and The Invention of Altruism, published in 2008. A health crisis on the scale that we're now experiencing inevitably generates strong emotions. The COVID epidemic is affecting everyone. How we feel about and for others has become a big issue. Even as we socially distance or lock down in our separate households, we know that the emotions we are experiencing, fear, loss, grief, anger, hope, are widely shared. Perhaps this sometimes lessens our sense of isolation. The pandemic can create a sense of identification with others, putting ourselves in their shoes, so to speak, even with strangers, which in turn can lead to feelings of concern and sympathy, feelings that we often call empathy. I'm Thomas. As a historian of the emotions, you've written much about our feelings with and for others. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of empathy?
Yes, thank you, Barbara, and thanks for having me in this conversation. A lot of people who have thought at all about empathy will know that it's a relatively modern term. It starts life as Einfühlung in German in the 1890s, and it means sort of feeling into something. So it's in its original meanings, it means sort of what we might call projection of our feelings into something, which could be an inanimate object or an artwork. Those were its original meanings in sort of psychology and aesthetics. And Susan Lanzoni's written a whole book about the history of empathy, which charts quite nicely its changing meanings from the late 19th century through to the present. And it's only in the second half of the 20th century that empathy comes to mean sort of what we mean by empathy now, whatever that might be, which we can discuss, which is more this sort of ability to feel the feelings of other people. And it also, during the 20th century, gets hooked up with various psychiatric diagnoses, meaning that you are either good or bad at it, depending on your sort of psychological stage. As you mentioned in the little intro at the beginning, kindly, I've written a whole book about altruism some time ago, the invention of altruism. And I think that's an important concept to have in our mind as well. It's got a similar historical sort of vintage in a way. It's a 19th century scientific concept. People who are interested can read my book, but it's coined by Auguste Comte, the French philosopher and sociologist. And the reason I say it's similar is it comes from a sort of scientific register, and it's an attempt to rethink our feelings for others in a modern scientific way. But altruism and empathy both have that kind of, and we can talk about the implications of that later. But altruism is also really interesting from the point of view of Tom's interest in humanitarianism, because Kant invented the term as part of his religion of humanity. This was an explicit secular religion worshipping humanity, and the ideal of that religion was altruism, the love of others. And obviously, that's different from Christian love. It's different from compassion. It's different from sympathy. So I'd like to sort of flag that up as something I'd be interested to discuss. And then also, obviously, sympathy and compassion are related but older moral terms, which again are different from empathy. And one of my colleagues, Sarah Cheney at Queen Mary, has been looking at compassion and the relatively recent history of nursing. And that's really interesting to look at how, if you look at the vocabulary around nursing and emotions of care in the earlier 20th century, compassion isn't mentioned. It's only, in fact, very recently that compassion has taken on a particular sort of moral and political value around nursing. And I guess just my final thing I would say is that I find myself, for reasons that I'm not entirely sure about, kind of hostile to all of this. I mean, my heckles go up as soon as anyone starts telling me I should be altruistic, empathetic, or compassionate. And I'm very suspicious of the discourse around it for reasons that I think Tom has thought about a bit historically, that it's sort of incredibly sentimental and pious and self-serving sometimes, this discourse. But that's probably enough opening comments.
I mean, clearly these issues about compassion, altruism, feeling for others, and so on are very relevant to the history of solitude that we work on in this project, and how it is that people bridge, in some sense, the distance between themselves and others in order to feel less alone in the world, and not just between people, but between people and animals. So, Tom, this is what I want to lead into, which is that if we accept the concept of empathy as something that people experience, they certainly, I think we can all agree, however it's characterized, that people certainly have powerful feelings with and for other people. But it's not just limited to people. I think that's, so I want to turn now to what is really in many ways the main topic of this conversation, which is empathy as an emotion that can arise between humans and animals.
So you ask about the animal connection. Well, I was somehow crystallized in the conference that the research group organized in the summer, where someone wrote a paper, I think it was on John Clare and his connection to birds, and opened the paper with a quote from John Berger, which I had read before, but hadn't quite sunk in, and having mediated to Clare and Clare's solitude and this relationship brought it home to me. And that's John Berger's notion that we have this relationship with animals because we're lonely, we as a species are lonely. And I think he takes it in other directions that not so interesting to me, that we've lost it completely, and that zoos and modern meat packing and so forth has made us lose that. I don't think we have lost it, but I think that fundamental loneliness and it's being assuaged, the connection with animals is still there. So I mean, the story is that, of course, as you pointed out, we've had long-standing connections with animals, all sorts of animals, and different cultures have in different ways. And it's not just the animals we bring into our homes, the dogs and the cats and the birds, but as Erica Fudge pointed out, also dairy cows, for example, who have a very intimate relationship with their owners and are named and are often spoken of in wills and so forth. So it's not just that, but the dog is a special version of the animal that one brings into one's home or cave, as it were, in the sense that it's clearly the first animal that humans had this relationship with. It's probably the only animal that's truly, quote, domesticated, that is, that through its biology and its evolution lives in order to have a relationship with humans. And we don't know exactly when this happened, and it's a big research topic now. I have been trying to find out the answer to the following. So in the caves of Chauveau, which were 45,000 years ago, we have a footprint of a boy who we know entered about 25,000 years ago. We know this because we get the carbon dating of the soot on the roof. And we also know that next to this boy walking into this cave are canid footprints. So the question is, is this the first boy and dog explore a cave story? Or is this a wolf that wandered in at some point after this? Now, what evidence we have for this is not clear. And I'm right now in correspondence with the archaeologist who's working on this, but they have all sorts of views. Possibly this is a wolf dog in between who sent in before to see whether the bear's in the cave. Possibly it's the dog, wolf dog that is slightly more friendly that went in. God knows how they're actually going to sort this through. But these very serious paleoanthropologists are interested in this as a kind of moment of human dog connection. And then again, the first paintings we have of humans doing anything with animals is of dogs about 8,000 years ago in the Arabian desert. And we have dog prints in tiles from Sumeria from 3,000 years ago, showing that dogs hung around with guys making bricks for temples. And we can go through this whole long history. So there is this kind of very intimate connection with these creatures who biologically who evolution has produced to have a connection to us, and at a very micro level. So there's been a recent paper which I find fascinating, in which someone showed that, but I can't remember the names now, showed that the dog can raise, like you're doing now, Barbara, raising your eyebrows.
Am I? Okay.
If you're interested in what I have to say, whether you are or not, I don't know, but you're raising your eyebrows. You're raising your eyebrows. It says, "Oh, I'm interested." Now the dog can raise its eyebrows. It has these muscles, which and wolves don't.
Oh.
So there's
so they evolved to look interested in us?
They evolved to look interested in us, which gets to the question of why we believe that they have empathy or sympathy for us, which is a philosophically different question. But they certainly, dogs, the cunning of evolution, so to speak, is that the dogs that look interested tend to get fed more, I guess, than the dogs don't look interested, whatever the just evolutionary just so story is. So in other words, there's a very long history of this, and I'm interested in it in painting, because it's such a huge theme. I mean, it's a theme part mythological, because in terms of men hunt with dogs, and so there's a whole mythology of dogs. There's the Dian and Actaeon story, and dogs hang out with Venus and Adonis story. So there's a whole bunch, and there's ones in other cultures, as well. And there's Ulysses' dog who waits for him. And so there's a whole version of this. And by the Middle Ages, one also gets women engaged with this in late Middle Ages. So dogs hang out with mass people in their studies. So they hang out with Christine de Pizan. When you illustrations of Christine de Pizan. So there's a version of dogs they hang out with beggars. You get this in Lazarus paintings. So you get a whole version of dogs just sort of caring about people who others don't care about, the blind, children. So there's a very long and powerful visual record of somehow dogs being there to care for us. And so the modern version of everyone wanting a dog at least builds on that emotional history, if you would say such a thing. And it doesn't mean people don't want cats, but people who want cats want a different kind of intimacy. I mean, when cat owners complain about dogs is absolutely right. Dogs need to exist in this version as if they care a lot about us. Well, cats exist in a world in which they don't. And so that's the projection. That's what's, and horses are interesting in between, because as Thomas knows, horses were one of the key animals that sort of, this crossover between humans and animals in the 18th century, in which the concern for the rights of horses is crucial in understanding the rights of slaves and of poor people and of all sorts of other people.
I wonder, could I ask what does, if Tom could say a bit more about the difference, what psychological insight we can gain into when someone's a dog lover or a cat lover? Because I say this as a cat owner myself, and my son is a horse lover. But we'll leave that aside for one moment. But what does it say? Does it mean am I a little bit more distant, a little bit more aloof if I like to hang out with cats?
I'm I'm not a clinician. I have certain, so I don't know, Thomas. I mean, I think it's a very different set of relationships that one has with cats. I mean, the point of the history of dogs and humans is that they just do a whole lot of things together. And so the reason you say the dog can be a human's best friend, which is an 18th century phrase, but has its versions earlier, is sort of what Stanley Cavell says about friendship. It doesn't matter what you do with your friends. It's that what you do with your friends. And so the thing is, you just do a lot of stuff with your dogs that you don't do with your cats because they have their own lives.
Is there, Tom, can I ask you, I mean, you know, we're talking about this as if maybe this is, you know, projections onto animals, or you say about the evolution of them to kind of look interested in us so that they get another, you know, another treat or you know, better meals or whatever. I mean, and is there do people who study these things think that there is actual scientific evidence that animals do in some sense, and in the ways that, you know, endless stories about able to care about people's emotional states, or I mean, all the endless stories of animals, dogs seeking to provide comfort. Although I have to tell you that I had a very emotionally dependent and needy cat who, when I was very miserable, would always leave presents of dead creatures outside my bedroom door, and was very shocked that I was not grateful for these gifts. But it was quite uncanny how the cat would kind of, you know, if they knew I was unhappy, then, you know, the little birdie, mutilated birdie would appear.
I mean, I have no insight. I mean, it's actually a philosophical question, or historical philosophical question discussed with Thomas. In other words, you do have cats, that wonderful cat in Renoir, that's sort of Caravaggis's cat that sort of snuggles over someone's neck, and people adore having. So is this the cat actually a way to snuggle with you, or is it just, it's not, it's a question that speaks to the human version as well. I mean, we claim people care when they act in a caring way.
That is true.
And we don't, and so I don't know what it is to have this I mean, this, I don't know what Thomas thinks about this. I mean,
Yeah.
whole anthropomorphism question that comes up, it seems to me a question with humans.
I completely agree with you that these questions about our relationship with animals bring into focus very good philosophical questions that apply to humans too. And we could ask ourselves, do we care what somebody is feeling? Does it matter whether my cat is feeling anything in particular when he is sat on my lap purring? Or, you know, is that physical presence in itself enough? But I mean, I think especially with companion animals and with companion humans, we do care what they're feeling for whatever reason. It's a central part of most of our philosophies that we do care, that the people and the animals are feeling something towards us, and that connection is mediated through a feeling that we would recognize if we were having it.
Yes.
Ourselves.
We can have, but that is the sort of puzzle, you know, Wittgenstein's puzzle, that if, you know, that Tiger could speak, we wouldn't understand it. I mean, that's so, you know, or Thomas Nagel's What's It Like to Be a Bat? I mean, we're not, you know, there is a kind of barrier, but when your son rides a horse and loves the horse, there has to be a feeling that the horse is getting something out of this. The horse is enjoying riding with him. And it's not like riding a bucking bronco at a you know, at one of these fast food restaurants where you put in a quarter and ride a, right. I mean, so there's an animate thing there that's present, or that you believe to be present. And I think that's the important part of the solitude version, that somehow having something in your house or in your barn, if you ride with it, is that there's some creature with whom you have for whom it matters that you're there.
And I think the fact that it is a non-human creature is very significant and makes it a very special kind of emotional experience, and a whole set of beliefs around it that, like as with all emotions, our beliefs about the emotions themselves produce the emotions and change the flavor of it. I mean, certainly in reference to solitude, which is one of the main things we're wanting to think about in connection with this, you're on your own in terms of there's no other humans there, but you're with another creature, as Barbara put it earlier. But also, I think for some children and adults who find human interaction very difficult, the interaction with a non-human creature has a special promise and a special value. And in fact, I think Tom referenced Warhorse earlier. Michael Morpurgo has spoken about the fact that he was inspired to write that story. He has a farm in which children visit, I think in Devon or the West Country, and a child many years ago visited that farm and didn't speak at all to any other people. But one day, Michael Morpurgo saw him in the stables talking to one of the horses, and it gave him this idea for a very special bond between a human.
That's fascinating.
Do you think it's, I mean, can I just ask, I mean, do you think, Tom, maybe this is, you've thought a lot about this. I mean, is it partly also that, I mean, we don't feel evaluated by animals on the same, you know, I mean, the relationship with animals, I mean, I think particularly, I mean, I was thinking about autistic children, or the child that Morpurgo refers to, is that sense that that there is a response coming from another creature, which I'm sure has, or I'm not sure at all, but I mean, one could imagine is a reaction to something that is coming from the person. I mean, something of which they're probably not conscious, a reaching out, possibly something that they can actually literally sense through, you know, through smell, or, you know, or hearing, that much more acute than ours. They're picking up messages, but we do not experience them as evaluative creatures in the way that we
some people do. Derrida famously think his cat.
Oh yeah, the critical cat, did he? Oh,
so it's not always the case, but I think most of us would feel. But I think that is the thing of people we share solitude with. We need to feel that these are not critical of us. I mean, that's the pet. I don't know if England has its pets for vets, or were vets who are traumatized, people who suffer from.
No, I don't. Well, perhaps
where people bring pets to often Vietnam era soldiers who are traumatized, and apparently the pets are a kind of vehicle for bringing them back into you know, human connections, or into dealing with this this trauma.
Oh, that's very interesting.
But I mean,
I know. I mean, I know that there's a lot of use of dogs, in particular, cats and dogs, in residential institutions, both for people of all ages with various difficulties, and also for the elderly.
With this, I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, the cat people and dog people will make a joke, but it actually is a serious question about what one has about having the animal around who's from whom one gets pleasure, precisely from the fact that they're by and large on their own. One likes the independence of a cat. I mean, in other words, it's a different psychology. I don't know whether it's just deeply dividing humans into categories. I mean, I'm not a clinician. You can ask your psychoanalytic friends about this.
Yeah. But if we keep pursuing maybe the question of dogs in particular, and the quality of companionship, I just wondered if you wanted to say a bit more. I mean, this is such a rich history, Tom, and I know you've been doing a lot of thinking about it, and I just wondered, and then to have it kind of so evident during the pandemic that people are actually seeking out dogs very much for this purpose. So I just wondered, and then you said they got very interesting remark about, you know, that human beings are solitary as a species. I mean, and dogs, of course, are, I think they're pack animals. I mean, they seek out others of their kind. I think in a dog's mind, if I've got it right, we are a variety of
well, it's not.
dogs.
Yeah, it's not, I don't know about the hierarchy of dogs. I think the point about loneliness, I think Berger's point is that primitive humans felt themselves somehow alone, different from, and yet connected to this vast animal world, and we've then subsequently in 20,000, 30, whatever years, 50,000 years, have come to sort of assimilate part of them into into our world. I mean, both Eliot and Darwin, of course, super interested in this whole animal emotion continuum. And the interesting about Darwin is that, just to Darwin, he's not interested so much in the vastly different sensorium of these animals. After all, a dog walks into a space and has a multi-dimensional set of smells that come from different directions. And we have no way of representing that. So we have a dog, we represent this, the dog seeing something, which is our own. So likewise, when Darwin, who was a passionate hunter, goes on in his diaries about training dogs, how great they are picking up a bird and not crushing its neck. And he's endlessly into dog. He's not interested in the dog, what makes it possible for the dogs to do this in terms of the dog's smell, the dog's mouth. He's interested in the fact that he and this dog have this relationship, and he seems to tell the dog to do something. The dog is really clever in doing it. And so they have this, it's like having a buddy.
Yeah.
Quite fascinating on this issue. And I think that is an important, there's been a great dissertation on Darwin and dogs. I can't remember the person who wrote it, who talks about Darwin's passion for hunting and goes through his diaries and just looks at all the hunting references. It's quite, opens the world for me. But in any case, it's a sort of version that this animal has an emotional life with you. And that sense is empathic in that it sees you'd like to do this. And so I can get with this program. You want the bird? Fine. And that makes you feel good in solitude or not in solitude. But Darwin was not a solitary person. But
what about all these images? I have to ask you, because we're in a time of widespread loss and grief and mourning. I mean, this is there you are, I believe. I mean, California, I understand, is in lockdown from this terrible pandemic. I mean, and all these powerful images that we have come down to us in stories about animals in mourning for bereaved animals, and I'm curious as to whether you think that I mean, a lot of these come from an era of high sentiment, no question about it. But I have a friend whose dog, I mean, he suffered acute separation anxiety. I mean, the moment that he thought they were packing up anywhere, he would go and find the suitcase and sit on it. And when one of the people was away for quite a long time over, they live in Canada over here, the dog went into a state of was clearly deep depression. And I just wonder what you make of all this stuff about grief and loss and canine mourning.
I don't know. Just I mean, I guess I'm sort of interested. I could speak about this, but I'm interested. Whether if Thomas were to run his institute not as a history of emotions with humans, but of dogs. I mean, obviously, he wouldn't have all these reports of emotion written down, so that's a problem. But otherwise, could you see doing your project? What would it look like if we did it with animals?
That's quite a challenge. Yeah, I mean, certainly human representations of dogs were fine. Yeah, I mean, so as you've both already commented, paintings of dogs mourning their dead owners and these repeated tropes and stories about very emotional dogs grieving. Yeah, wow. I mean, there is quite a lot of work done on material culture and history of emotions, which prioritizes, things. I'm not saying that dogs are things, but there are attempts done to do sort of history of emotions from a non-human, non-verbal point of view. I may be pretty much the worst person to ask about that, though, because I'm a very logocentric kind of historian. I'm forever looking at exactly what words were used and how they changed over time. And to the extent that I actually find it quite hard to conceive of doing history of emotions without it being anchored in a particular language and through particular words. But I think it's a really good thought experiment to say, what do we think? How do we think the dog mind has changed? And another thing is that a dog history of emotions would, I think, lack the kind of reflexivity that a human history of emotions has. In the thing I was alluding to earlier, that what we believe about our emotions changes our emotions. What we believe about our emotions changes how we represent them, how we talk about them, and how we feel them.
That's brilliant. I'm just been reading Proust, and that's obviously what Proust is all about. I mean, you have an emotion, and then you have the memory of the emotion.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you have this, and it's a kind of, it builds and it rebuilds. And you're right, animals don't we know don't have that temporality. That's absolutely right. I mean, I suppose what I'm saying is that in terms of the loneliness or caring is that somehow we interpret a human saying, "I don't want you to leave," or even crying, "I don't want you to leave. Don't leave me alone," um, as coming from something cognitive and higher. And when a dog sits on the suitcase, we say, "Well, we don't know what it's feeling." And I guess I'm a little bit of the, I grew up in analytic philosophy with, Gilbert Ryle, and the idea is not believing in a ghost in a machine. So I'm willing to say when a dog sits on a suitcase and doesn't want you to go, the dog doesn't want you to go. With in this, and
Fair enough.
That whole idea has got a really interesting history as well. All the way back to Descartes of whether we do treat animal minds like human minds, or completely different, or completely non-existent.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that, so again, for me, it's a really useful thought experiment, almost like a parable. How do we interpret the dog on the suitcase? What do we think it's feeling? And actually, what we're doing with other humans is a lot more like that than we might like to think. I think that's quite useful.
That was David Hume's take. I mean, David Hume rather turned Descartes in his head and said, "Well, it's not so much we have reason and they don't. Neither of us have reason." Neither of us. This is not the motive, the drive. And if you take it from a Humean perspective, in other words, it's not.
The passions are moving all of us.
I think that's what I think cognitive science is moving in that direction. And I mean, obviously, part of this is the deep mystery of consciousness, which Darwin, as Thomas alluded at the beginning, wrestled with the question of consciousness, and he needed to have the continuity rather than the discontinuity, and yet could never quite get there. The reflexivity is
very interested in the outward signs. I mean, Darwin's book is about the expression of the emotions, and he's very, very interested in the face, the body, the hair, when our hair stands on end, what we do with our teeth, whether we foam at the mouth. And that's where he's in his element. Obviously, he's an observer. He's wanting to pin down the outward signs. He's more shaky on what exactly he thinks he's claiming about the feeling and the mentality behind it, which is not really what he's interested in. Actually, he's really interested in the outward signs, but he assumes a continuity of feeling.
People later on, obviously, Romanes, who did more experiments in this, tried to sort of work for a continuity. But I think the point is, what cognitive, at least my sense of what people are finding, is that less reason reflexivity, but a sense of common gestural language. So in other words, why are dogs not as good as wolves at opening containers? Mainly because when the dog can't open a container in an experiment, it looks at the human and says, "So
do it for me."
Help me open the container. So it's a little bit like us coming to a door. You have two bags. It's not like you try to struggle to open the door. You look, if you're lucky, at someone with you and saying little gestures, "So open the door." So there's a sense in which it seems to me that the dog evolution is such that the dog has come to learn to live in a world in which it thinks about this. It doesn't reflect on, now I'm going to ask the human, but it is built to look for. But I'm not sure we think about, when you're trying to open the door, that we go through a cognitive process of first form.
Well, I mean, that's very.
Like I don't want to practice philosophy without a license. I mean, that comes up.
Why not? Go for it.
Is there intention before there's an? And it turns out in monkeys there is an intention. I mean, one can find in monkeys that things fire in one part of the brain before monkeys actually move the muscles. And that's such a kind of brilliant set of mathematical biology that it's then proven in experiments. So there does seem to be this, that at least primates have a place where something, before you actually automatically move a muscle, you make some quote intention to move the muscle. So I guess my feeling is that we all act as if animals, and I think dogs are a paradigmatic case of a certain sort, but cats and horses and cows, and to some extent birds, share an emotional world with us. And I don't know what evidence we would have to, what would disprove that, because we believe that humans share an emotional world. That's also as we know, a big philosophical problem. I mean, so that's
Well,
where
maybe having kind of, opened up these huge problems. I mean, it's a very interesting point to make, Tom and Thomas, at a time, of course, when we hear constantly about how the impact of climate change and environmental depredation on animals, and the disappearance, incredible rate of all sorts of species of animals, what human development has done to animals. Right now, the human animal is finding itself in a, animals, fortunately, other animals are being spared COVID, while we experience once again our tremendous vulnerability and also varieties of solitariness and loneliness that predated the pandemic, but have certainly, I think, been accelerated and taken some unprecedented forms during the pandemic. So, and those who turn to animals for companionship and consolation, perhaps, during this very difficult period. So I'm going to draw us to a close with many thanks to both of you for what has really been an incredibly interesting conversation, and with the deep anticipation that we shall have more such conversations in person when Thomas comes to Queen Mary as a distinguished visiting fellow in next autumn. We sincerely
looking forward to the white coat and showing up in Thomas's emotions.
Yes, no, your rooms are booked for you at Queen Mary, Thomas. So thank you both very, very much.